Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. We are just 3 weeks away from lights out in Melbourne for the first race of the new season. Everyone is currently trying to figure out what the pecking order looks like now and what we should be expecting in just a few weeks' time. Ferrari think Mercedes have plenty more up their sleeve, especially when it comes to energy deployment. The George Russell was waxing lyrical about Red Bull's power unit over these last few days, but Ferrari themselves have their own set of tricks up their sleeve, including a raft of further upgrades they are set to bring to the opening round. Your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always. We're going to start with a couple of things. Max Verstappen is not the happiest man about these regulations, and we're going to discuss in some more detail as to why. He says, look, maybe I'll do the 24 hours of Nürburgring because at least there I can actually go full throttle with these cars. Most drivers, maybe all drivers, are not an especially big fan of what this means to drive. I think my primary concern is that we've seen lots of talk about turn 12 in Bahrain and similar corners where even on a qualifying lap, you are effectively super clipping the engine. So the engine has only 600, 550 horsepower roughly once there's no more battery juice left. But instead of putting all that 600 horsepower into the wheels, you are doing that, but then you're using the MGUK to actually slow the car down, keep it at a constant rate. So effectively a good couple hundred of those horses are going straight to charging up the battery. And that means that for corners like turn 13 in Bahrain, or imagine Monza, you've just used all the juice down the main straight through sector 1, you now go into Lesmo 1, Lesmo 2. Those are tricky corners. Lesmo 2 especially, you can run wide there onto the gravel. We see it all the time. But it's quite probable that for that section, there's going to be super clipping going on. Therefore, the cars are not on the limit through that section, and it might be far easier for the drivers to get the line spot on through those corners. So that's the problem, right? It feels to me that we're moving away from a world where the driver skill is how on the limit you can be with adhesion. It's more how on the limit you can be with energy deployment. And in many cases, driving the car through tricky corners, Suzuka, Degner 1, Degner 2, there could well be a similar thing happening there. We'll see how the season really goes, but a lot of the experienced drivers that have nothing to lose, as it were, they're quite keen to tell it how it is. Perez says it's not ideal. Alonso, Verstappen, Hamilton, probably the key names who were calling it out over the first couple of days. And the concerning thing to me is, as bad as you thought it might be at Bahrain over the last few days, it's going to get worse because Bahrain is not a bad circuit in theory in terms of energy recovery. These are your percentages of laps spent at full throttle. So Monaco, there shouldn't be too many concerns there. Mexico is kind of interesting because it feels like a lot of the track actually is, but there's such a slow, windy segment at times that actually that percentage is far lower. But for circuits like Baku, and again, Baku's technically only 60% on throttle, but the way that the circuit is designed, the way that the straights are, I'm sure that energy is going to be a problem in Baku. But the circuits where it will definitely be an issue, Monza, Melbourne is not a great one either because there's not too many heavy braking zones either in Melbourne. That is a problem in terms of recovery. It shouldn't even be something we need to think about, but unfortunately in these regs it is. Jeddah, Silverstone, Vegas, Spa, those are kind of, in theory, the key candidates for a bit of a disaster class. Now, the major talking points coming out of Mercedes over the last couple of days was another similar graphic when it comes to what Verstappen and Red Bull were doing with their energy recovery. They had Red Bull and Verstappen way more deployment towards the end of the main straight in Bahrain than anybody else was able to manage, certainly over consecutive laps. Mercedes saying, wow, that must be because Red Bull have a way better engine than us. Our engine is obviously terrible. FIA, please don't nerf it in the upcoming committee meeting in a couple of days' time. We'll see how that goes. There's obviously politics in play. But it must be noted that Verstappen was, out of Verstappen and Hamilton, their fastest laps of the weekend, of the week, he was the only one of the two of them to use any time in first gear at all. The Ferrari doesn't use the first gear. Now, to be honest, the first gear has basically not been used at all over the last few years anyway, but now it is relevant because if you can go down to first gear, which some gearboxes and some cars and some rev ranges, depending on how you set up your gearing, just doesn't suit especially well. But it does appear that Red Bull is focused on using more first gear than others, and that means they can generate more power at that rev range for the MGU-K to recharge the battery. That's what this is all about. Max may not like these regulations, but he will do whatever it takes to drive them as fast as possible. This, it seems, is Red Bull's approach. So Hamilton is using, well, a lot more 7th gear, which is interesting because, well, Verstappen might gaining in 1st gear, and we don't know what the gearings are. That's what throws this all off, really. We don't know exactly what the rev ranges are and all of this, but this is a graphic comparing the top 4 teams on paper: Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes. Mercedes and McLaren using a little bit of 1st gear, mostly at turn 10, but Max is using it a lot in all the circumstances he can. That's giving them more recovery. But in 7th gear, he's not using it much at all. He's actually preferring 8th, and the McLaren likes being in 8th, but the Mercedes barely is in 8th at all. And Hamilton's kind of somewhere in the middle in the Ferrari. So it's all very interesting. It does come down to gearings. This is not so driver style dependent. Often it's on what the car is capable of doing. But it does appear that the Red Bull might be better suited, and Max will certainly maximize what he can out of it, driving at the lower gears to generate more recovery. Now, the problem is that often dropping down from 2nd to 1st, it can be destabilizing, especially for the rear of the car. That appears to be the main issue that Aston Martin is struggling with. People are looking at Red Bull and Verstappen and saying, oh, why don't we just copy that approach? That seems to be better for their recovery. The issue is, it creates rear locking, it creates some rear instability. Apparently, if Alonso tries to do the same thing in the Aston Martin, the rears lock. So that's a problem for all the teams to be aware of. It also puts more pressure on the gearbox, which is an area where teams will be struggling. Certainly Aston Martin, we believe that is true for. There are rumours that Mercedes need to have a lot of work on their gearbox to mean that they can do a similar thing. So it's a very interesting situation. That actually was the rumour from Motorsport Italia, that Mercedes have to reinforce their gearbox structure because they've got strong pressures on it, and Red Bull have prepared themselves well for this scenario. It does appear, though, when we look at the pure performance, that it might not make a huge amount of difference. Yeah, Verstappen might be gaining an edge by going down to 1st gear and gaining more recovery, but Ferrari's long-run pace was the best of anyone, and they weren't using 1st gear at all. So it does depend on the gearing. I think they have a couple of days. I'm pretty sure after this upcoming test, that's when they need to finalise things in terms of what the gearing is going to be for the entire season. So they've got effectively just a few more days of practice before they have to decide where they sit for the entire year. Now, one of the other dramas, of course, of these regulations has been what it means for the race starts. This was a hilarious clip. Sam Collins was sitting here at the pit lane exit in Bahrain and says the teams are looking to make changes to the start procedure because the turbos are taking so long to spool up because there's no longer an MGUH, but Ferrari, they are opposed to that because they deliberately designed their car to compensate for this. Pretty sure that they've designed a smaller turbo with presumably less absolute top-end speed, but it struggles less with the problem of spooling up in time. Ferrari do tend to like the smaller turbochargers. It was often considered one of the reasons why they used to struggle in Mexico was because the turbo was so small and at the altitude it couldn't get the air it needed, stuff like that. Collins then points at Lewis Hamilton in his Ferrari, and he sits there for roughly the next 25 seconds revving the engine before eventually going away. And Sam was absolutely mind-blown because he was like, hang on a second, I've just told everyone that Ferrari spools up nice and fast so they can get going, and Hamilton sat there for 25 seconds. Was this all part of the play? Because some people were saying, oh, Hamilton did this deliberately. And I think my initial reaction was, what are you talking about, right? Come on. But Sam Collins actually says no, he thinks that is possible. I believe he might have done it on purpose. He would have seen us filming other cars' launches, and he pulled up right next to us. Others launched a bit further back. So, yeah, Sam Collins thinks that maybe Hamilton was playing a little bit of a practical joke, because that was all the talk about, oh, Ferrari, they're able to pull away much faster. And, well, no, it doesn't appear that they were, at least in that case. Because of this, again, another problem of these regulations, we're now talking about safety. Understandably, the teams are concerned that if there's a problem in the start and the driver stalls on the grid, and you've got blindsided drivers hurtling it down with massive acceleration with these new engines and the immense torque that they have from the electrical motors, there could be some bad accidents, and we don't want to see stuff like that. But there is an argument to say, well, Ferrari, which they did, warned about this 12 months ago. They made the respective adjustments to deal with it for their own car. And despite that pretty funny clip, in general, the theory does appear to hold true that Ferrari are better positioned on this angle than most. But McLaren, they're all guns blazing. Piastri's coming out and saying it's a recipe for disaster, these starts. McLaren and Andrea Stella are saying that there's severe safety concerns. We've got to change this right now. And look, if you push the buttons on safety concerns, the FIA often feel like they need to respond. But should they? It's a good question. Do I want a world where we ignore this because Ferrari say, well, look, we adjusted for it and you guys didn't, it's not our problem, which is fair, but then we turn up to a race and there's a horrific crash? We don't want that. But equally, McLaren arguably are doing this because they got caught out, right? Ferrari adapted, they innovated, the other teams didn't, and now they're getting punished for it. At least that's how it appears. Now, Ferrari, of course, are opposed to this. Ferrari say, no, we're not going to change the race start procedure. And presumably that does need quite the number of teams to agree in order to pass it, right? And if Ferrari also have the support of Haas and of Cadillac, potentially their other customer team, then maybe it's not possible to change. We know that for the engine regulations, they need 4 of 5. Well, they need 5 of 5 to change certain things, and for other things, they need at least 4 of 5, plus the FIA, plus Formula 1. So in this case, Ferrari are opposed to any such idea, and if their customer teams are also on board with a similar idea, then probably nothing will happen. But you can never rule out what the FIA may or may not do. Alonso says the AMR26 might not be as bad as we think. There are some laps where we are 8 tenths up or down by just changing one setting on the car. So it's not like we need to find 2 tenths. We might be able to unlock seconds in our car when we get it right. But of course, far easier said than done. Alonso even said it's probably the engine where they look currently most far behind. Honda themselves say, don't worry, lads. We're testing next week how high the temperature can rise with more aggressive cooling specifications, currently improving our simulations for the week. Honda think it ain't the end of the world just yet, so we'll see. But there were rumours that Lawrence Stroll was not especially happy with Honda. Some degree of cultural differences going on there as well. But what about performance of the actual real contenders? I did mention a Haas a second ago. There is the feeling that they are quite well positioned. The rumour coming out of Ted Kravitz and Craig Slater, they talked to numerous people from numerous teams. They put together their list. Effectively, they had Ferrari number 1, Mercedes number 2, but with some major question marks on whether they're really sandbagging. Red Bull probably 3rd, with McLaren maybe slightly ahead. 5th, tough to say. Probably Haas or Racing Bulls, which is pretty impressive from either of those teams. There's a feeling that Williams and Alpine, despite the Mercedes power unit, maybe too overweight. They might be a bit behind right now. I'm still expecting better things out of Alpine, but I guess time will tell. The back of the grid is apparently Cadillac, Aston Martin ahead of them, Audi ahead of them. That's pretty much where it sits right now. But at the top level, Piastri says, I certainly don't think it'll be the same Aussie Grand Prix as last year when it comes to performance. Red Bull and Pierre Wache, they, as all the teams are doing, are downplaying their performance. Wache said he thinks they're 4th the other day. He then says, we've got some issues with the weight of the car, just like the other teams. It's possible that others have it a bit better than us, which is interesting because famously the RB18 was quite substantially overweight at the start of the 2022 season. Once they got that dialed in, the car became quite rapidly faster. It does appear that it's the same story again. The question is, are the other teams closer to that number? Does that, is that good or bad, right? Because of course at the start of the season, let's say Mercedes are very close to the 770, which is roughly what the number is this season, then okay, great for them at the start of the year, but also they don't have easy gains, whereas weight, if Red Bull can get it out of their car, certainly that's true at Aston Martin and Williams, for example, right now, they can gain easy performance with really no disadvantage. But it is costly to develop in such a manner. The SF26, however, probably the car that has really started to turn the most heads over the last few days. They brought some upgrades on the second day to Bahrain. I don't know if they have more to come this upcoming week. We are expecting more upgrades from other teams. But then, apparently, Ferrari have yet more to bring when we turn up to Melbourne. So this article from, I think, Donadoni, but the guys at Auto Racer, they talk a fair bit about Ferrari's car. I'll leave a link down below and some of the intriguing features of it. But they also say this: Ferrari, second or the third fastest team. That's the general consideration, because people still have Mercedes probably first, or maybe Red Bull if you're talking to Mercedes. There might be some logic to that. Ferrari, though, are pretty convinced that Mercedes are hiding quite a lot of performance right now. I think it would be argued it is in Mercedes' interest, given the compression ratio situation, not to look as dominant in Bahrain as they did in Barcelona. Again, do I think that Russell is probably telling the truth, that they had some problems, they had a difficult weekend, it was a bit of a reality check? Yeah, I can see that, but equally, I would be surprised if Mercedes don't have at least a little bit more to show, and I'd be very surprised if they are substantially behind Red Bull when it comes to energy deployment and recovery. That would be, frankly, embarrassing, as Christian Horner indicated when he was running the show over there and building that team. This is based on GPS data between Barcelona and the Bahrain race. There's a belief in Maranello that the Mercedes power unit has something extra, especially in terms of energy recovery. Leclerc says Mercedes has shown very interesting signs here in Bahrain, and I must say they are hiding quite a bit. So that is the question. Mercedes have almost become the unknown because they have been waxing lyrical about Red Bull, less so about Ferrari and McLaren. I feel like Mercedes are pretty confident that they have the measure of their customer teams, that's for sure. I think Mercedes are confident they're going to be ahead of McLaren, but they're talking a lot about Red Bull and their energy and their power units because, well, there's a lot of strength in that, clearly. They can also talk about the reliability at Ferrari, because there's seemingly a lot of strength in that as well. But as we know, there's obviously a political game going on here as well. The feeling from Auto Racer is this was a far better test, a far better preseason so far than Ferrari had even last year. I mean, last year with the SF25, you would have expected fourth year of the regs, should be a pretty smooth preseason. It wasn't by any means. They had a very difficult preseason, a disastrous start, and that turned into a disastrous season. But they look rational, they look solid, maybe less flashy than some rivals. Certainly at the front of the car, there's a feeling that there's plenty of room to develop, and there's further rumours that there are more upgrades on the way. Now look, this will be true for every single team, but the question for many is, what spec will they bring now and for the future, and certainly for the second week in Melbourne? There's a rumour that Red Bull will bring effectively their Melbourne spec to next week in Bahrain. McLaren might do a similar thing. So look, every team is going to have some sort of change and upgrade in Melbourne, you would imagine. But the feeling is that other teams are bringing some of those parts very swiftly. Ferrari already looked pretty good after an upgrade package they brought on the Thursday. They're probably going to leave it largely next week as it was in Bahrain again. And then in a couple of weeks' time in Australia, they're going to bring a significant batch of upgrades. So that will be the difference maker, right? As was said by the Auto Racer boys as well. The aerodynamics, yeah, that's important. But for the first few races, engine, fuel consumption, weight will be critical factors. And then as time goes on, upgrades are going to make the difference. But Ferrari do appear better positions than they have before. The question, I guess, is because Ferrari said that they won't be, let's say, opposing or protesting if Mercedes' compression ratio is deemed legal when they go to Bahrain. But they're certainly against the idea when they meet with the commission in a couple of days. So I think most fans after the Bahrain test would say, okay, Mercedes, they still look good, but not as, let's say, indomitable as they appeared after Barcelona. Is that all part of the play for Mercedes to, let's say, lower expectations? Possibly. Verstappen obviously said, look, I know Merc's got way more power. We'll see it in Melbourne. And then you've got Leclerc saying, well, we think Mercedes has more to give. Russell says, well, I hope we've got an ace up our sleeve. Everyone during testing is still running and learning and not running maximum performance. So he does admit that no one is running maximum performance, which obviously shows that, yes, Mercedes are sandbagging to some degree. The question is, to what extent? Because every team, of course, holds some things things back. Happy birthday to George Russell as well, 28 today. So very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.